is Reprezent 107.3 FM.
Yeah.
We've run straight into the politics,
Yeah.
which is making me laugh because I said to Joe at the beginning, I said, we're going to wander into this conversation, but I don't want to go there straight away. He literally ran at it full force, but that's right.
By the way, I just wanted to big up Rico, Carl and Jamal on the door. I told them I'll big them up still.
Hold them up still, big them up. No, it's like I knew we were going to get here and we needed to get here, so maybe it's good that we ran straight in with it. But do you feel, one thing I wanted to ask you is, do you feel like, so I know personally in an interview you said that your music and your artistry is always interlinked with your political beliefs, and you can't not speak about injustice and war when you make art. Do you feel every musician has that responsibility, not to talk about necessarily politics, but their social background and the things going on in their life?
No, well, I think there's an interesting phrase that goes, you may not do politics, but politics does you. And I think it's understanding that a lot of the ways that we behave, the things that we wear, the ways we speak can often be manifestations of power dynamics that are existing and operating through us. So whether it is our own vulnerability to certain types of advertising, you know, why is it we choose to wear the clothes that we wear? Why is it we choose to even buy the food that we buy? On some level, there are corporations that are vying for your attention. Now, all of that is the end product of political mechanisms and processes which really do have a deep effect on our life. So I would say my music is probably more explicitly political than definitely most other artists in the country, but at the same time I wouldn't say that their music is apolitical. You know, even in a situation where you've had, you know, since 2010 over 350 youth centres closed, you've had over 300 libraries shut. Stormzy, for instance, founding Murky Books is actually a political act, because what he's saying at a time when the government are cutting off this route to the written page, you know, a time when our society is moving from being a print-based culture to more an image-based culture, for Stormzy to do that is a political act. For him to provide the scholarships he's providing, that is also a political act. It's just somebody like me who's more a campaigner than a rapper. I'm a campaigner that raps rather than a rapper that campaigns. And so there is kind of a difference in that, and I'm kind of aware of that. But at the same time, it's important to you know, appreciate the acts of dissent that take place that may be more subtle and more implicit. It doesn't always have to be explicit in the way that I have felt compelled to be. You know,
that balance of a campaigner that raps, as you put it there. Yeah. Do you feel when was that balance? Because was it always in that order, or was there a transition for you? Whether it was a particular moment or? Yeah,
I mean, I think it was probably 2009. So it was the bombing of Gaza in 2009. That, you know, the stakes have got higher and higher throughout my life. You know, from obviously the invasion of Iraq, but then Grenfell. Constantly I have seen the stakes become closer and closer and closer to home, and I have seen the price of passivity become more expensive. And so because of that, I've just been forced really into that position. Rather than it being a conscious decision, it's been something that's happened progressively.
Yeah, because you had a sort of self-imposed hiatus in pursuit of knowledge, and you did a PhD in history, is that right?
No, I haven't completed a PhD. Okay. I'm completing a master's at the moment, okay. The PhD is the aim.
Okay, the clarification.
Yes.
And yet it felt like with Grenfell in particular, which happened really close proximity, like opposite from where you lived, that almost just you're on hiatus, but it kind of, you felt forced to, if that's for want of a better word, you felt, you know, impulsively, I have to speak on this and play my part now in speaking up for these people and these problems and these issues.
Yeah.
Did you, at that time, were you in a place where you're like, I'm ready to put out my music before that happened, or?
Yeah, I was. I had music I was ready to put out. But, you know, if you were in a situation where 72 people were in a building that was burning right in front of you, right out your window, you know, what are you going to do? Are you going to let that just happen and slide?
No.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that always sticks with me is infrastructure being invisible until it malfunctions. So, for instance, there's numerous components in this building that we don't even have a name for. And it was the same with cladding. And the same with the insulation. You know, I had never heard the word cladding before Grenfell. So I didn't realize how potentially dangerous it could be and how important a very tiny devil in the details type of issue like building regulations could be to people's health and safety. And now we're in a situation when we're realizing that potentially the soil that our kids could be playing in could be giving them cancer, as the University of Lancashire research came out a few days ago saying that it's 160 times higher the level of carcinogens that we're being exposed to in the area than the regulation should be. So these are really important issues, but they're quite complicated and they're quite difficult to kind of pin down. So like I say, the issue of insulation and cladding became important to me just because I saw how dramatic the effects could be when you don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, and I feel like when that happened, people seeing it even from a distance, and it was like there was this overall feeling of injustice and like people wanting to rally around a particular point, but it was so complex. Obviously, there was even something as like I saw an interview talking about how you said in one of your first part of your song about the situation where you mentioned corporate liability or manslaughter,
yeah.
And how even that, because that was kind of a term that was going around a lot, and then you actually corporate manslaughter implies kind of that, you know, the way if that would be dealt with legally, that's not really a satisfying description of what happened.
Yeah, I mean, it entered the lexicon because of David Lammy early on, and what you take from that is the way that the law is, as far as I understand. I'm not a lawyer, but in the situation of corporate manslaughter, unless you had somebody also being charged for manslaughter by gross negligence or something like that, if it was merely corporate manslaughter, all that would mean is that the corporation in question, whether it was US corporation Arconic or French company Celotex who did the insulation, they would merely pay a fine to the British government. Or if it was RBKC, they'd pay a fine to the British government. Well, that's the local government, that's the council. So if they're taking that money and where's that? Whose pocket is that coming out of, essentially? And that's all that would happen. Nobody would go to prison. Yeah. What happened at Grenfell is actually, while it is complex, it's actually quite basic. You have a US construction company, Arconic, and Celotex, companies not from this country, that have put materials on buildings all across the country that are endangering people's lives. Now, the fire that happened in Bangladesh several days ago, within 3 to 4 days of the fire, the owners of the building were arrested. Wow. Up until now, nobody has been arrested for Grenfell. Let's think about that. Let's think about what's that saying to you about the extent of the incestuous relationship between government and corporate power in this country. Why is it that Celotex, the insulation company, saw fit to post on their website in 2011, Celotex has entered government, we are now shaping building regulations to maximize benefit to our industry? Why is it that when Sajid Javid was Minister for Housing, he had an advisor on building regulations that was the technical director of Celotex? Why is it that Celotex had a bright pink bus that they rented out in 2014 going all around the country saying building regulations are now changing, go with Celotex? Why is it that it's basically subsidized by the government for you to get insulation on your buildings, when in actuality that insulation we cannot be sure is actually safe for human habitation? It should have changed everything. It should have been a never again moment, but it wasn't. And unfortunately, people have been willing to project onto Grenfell whatever they want. So somebody could say, conceivably, project the issue of colonialism onto Grenfell, but yet they won't read from Grenfell the very names of the companies that were written on the material that was plastered to that building. Why is it that people can talk about colonialism but not talk about Celotex and Arconic? Let's talk about the fact that Arconic also make the F-35 fighter jet, which has been sold to Israel, will be used on the people of Gaza sooner or later. Yeah, let's build those bonds. Let's talk about the way that Arconic, a construction company, is also working with Lockheed Martin and BAE Systems to make killing machines. So the company that made the cladding, 6mm of polyethylene in the middle of it, 30,000 litres of petrol, the equivalent of, can get away with that and yet simultaneously also be making weapons, and no one cares, and it's normal, it's wallpaper,
it's passivity, as you say. And do you feel like there is a way you can wake people up to these issues and kind of make it more apparent in their mind? Like, what do you feel is the best course? Because essentially you've taken your hiatus from music 8 years, I believe.
No, not quite 8 years, man. Okay. It was, in terms of release of an album, that's right, it is 8 years. Like, the last album I released was 2011, but I kind of stopped making music in 2012 and then started making music again in like 2016. But this is the first album, in like 8 years.
And what was the reason behind that? Do you feel like the music is something that is gonna bring attention and light to these issues? Do you think like it helps build that bond like you're talking about?
Definitely, man. I think it does. And things have changed as well. You know, I think people are completely disenchanted and exasperated with the existing economic philosophy of our times, the dominant economic philosophy of our times, which is neoliberalism, which says that corporations are more capable to deal with the functions of the state than the state itself. So the idea of public assets or really important functions of state actually being handled better by private interests and corporations who work on the logic of profit over the logic of human life, protecting human life. This is now completely discredited. It's morally bankrupt. It's been absolutely clear to be something that can only exist in a dictatorial way. It can only exist as something imposed on a society. A society would not willfully choose that. Neoliberalism cannot be elected. It's an unelectable idea. It's about taking the control over your destiny away from people and placing it in the hands of private interests. And so now we come to a point where what has been the product of that process overtaking the political class, so that becoming an orthodoxy that the political class have over the last 30 years. It led to the deindustrialization of this country. It led to the shutting down of steel factories, of the coal mines. So whole areas were impoverished because this is what they relied on for industry, and it placed them in competition with people in other countries that do jobs similar to them. But we know that what you're likely to expect for wages in this country is not the same level of what you'd expect for wages in China, right? Well, so therefore, a lot of jobs that formerly existed here are now being done in other places, in the EU or in China. So people all across the country are disgruntled with that situation. Okay, who do you bring in to blame for those grievances that people have with the economic system? Why not bring in the Muslim? It makes perfect sense. If you have those grievances, you're far more likely to look at the person sitting in the waiting room with you at the hospital rather than look at George Osborne, who took away X amount of money from the NHS, rather than look in the way that drains the resources and thus makes it more difficult for you to get seen when you need to get seen. You'll rather blame somebody whose name you can't pronounce, who's from a country that you've never heard of, and if you have heard of it, maybe you've only heard of it because Britain's bombing it, or Britain used to occupy it. So therefore it starts to make sense. This idea of people being in a sort of clash of civilization situation, it makes sense. The fact is, 8 men in this world have as much wealth as half of humanity. Is that an economic system that is working, or is that an economic system which is hurting? What do you think?
Do you feel
it's
definitely not working? We know that. Oh, we agree with you there. But do you feel like there is any cure and way that we can stop this system? Because we know by now, and I feel like we're strong advocates of the show, that a lot of the things that happen are distraction. Like you're saying, the pitting of society against society, man against your fellow man, in an attempt to, like you're saying, blame the person who looks different, who looks foreign in the waiting room, rather than look at who's setting the policies, is something that is used to distract us and to kind of pacify us while they continue to take away things from us. They take away things from our society, things we rely on, like youth clubs and libraries and all of this. What is the cure? How do we make people aware of this? What do you think that can be curtailed and stopped?
I mean, I think the reality of it is that people that don't own property in this country only have the right to vote because for 300 years people mobilized for that right. It took from the Putney debates to the Peterloo massacre. in 1819. You know, people were actually killed in this country for coming out and demonstrating, asking for the right to vote as people that didn't own property, as people who weren't landed gentry. It wasn't until 1928 that both women and men who didn't own property could vote. We're talking from the 1600s to 1928. That's how long that struggle was. So if we understand history, then we understand clearly that the things that we now say to be representative of our society actually were won by people mobilizing from below. They weren't given from above. You know, they weren't bequeathed to the people below by the people above. So it's really important for us to have that understanding. And if we look at Grenfell, what we see is a group of people who lost family members, who survived the inferno, or who witnessed it and lost friends, now campaigning for the health and safety of people all around the country. But what the mainstream media has been able to do is depict those people in that building as undeserving foreigners who shouldn't have the right to live in social housing in Kensington, rather than as defenders of the rest of the people in this country's lives. And so it's quite easy for people to then project the war on terror onto those people that died in that building and to burn an effigy, because they don't actually see those people as one and the same with them. You know, if say Grenfell United or a group like that wins a new regulation in terms of the rules on the construction industry, that's going to affect those very people that burnt that effigy. So if they're going to be safe in their homes, if a US or a French construction company is not able to put dangerous materials on their building, let's say their names Arconic and Celotex are not able to put dangerous materials on their buildings, it will be because of the community around the Grenfell Tower. The very same community that they otherwise dismiss and marginalize as almost non-human, unfortunately.
Do you think vilification, it works in an era where we have so much access to media that regardless of what we're told in the mainstream, we can I'm not saying it's easy to find out the truth, but different perspectives are allowed to be shared. Do you feel like that has helped?
Yeah, definitely, because I think that you can demystify a lot of the misinformation that's put out there. But at the same time, Tim Berners-Lee, the man that was responsible for creating the internet, actually said that one of his fears with the internet today is the extent to which people no longer have privacy, and corporations and governments are able to manipulate people basically through the internet. And it's quite interesting because you do see, in terms of psychological warfare, there's a myriad of new ways for you to, there's even literally a situation where corporations will bid on information about your search engine in order to know how best to target you through advertising. Well, I mean, always that level, you can take it back to Bernays and this crystallizing of public opinion and the way to manipulate people to buy cigarettes and whatnot. But it's never had this level of sophistication and intimacy that it now has. The ways in which you are visible through your digital footprint or fingerprint is really unprecedented, actually, in human history. So the information that corporations and governments now know about you because of your presence on the internet, they tortured people for in the past. I mean,
unfortunately, we've run out of time.
Wow.
I want to go
so much more to ask there about your own use of the internet now. We haven't even got to the tour.
We haven't talked for the next any music
5 weeks.
See, this is why we were supposed to talk about music first.
Yeah, that's my fault. Is there a sort of quick place that you? Is there an easy link for people to go to for more information about the forthcoming tour?
Yeah, man, I'd say follow me on Instagram, Lowkey Online. On Twitter, obviously, Lowkey Online with a 0. I'm on tour from the 11th. We're in London on the 19th at Earth in Hackney. The album's coming out on the 5th of April next Friday.
It's a good album.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. I appreciate it, man.
You're always welcome to come and join us.
Thank you very much.
You can come next week. You can have a whole hour.
We'll do it, brother.
Thank you for coming down.
Thank you for coming through.
Nice one, bro.
Now it's Max and Piney for the next 2 hours. bringing you some pretty wavy hip hop. We've been Joe and Scully. This is the Sunday Roast, and we'll be back same time next week.
This is Reprezent 107.3 FM.